flight of fancy on a windward field. Standing alone, my senses reel. Fatal attraction is holding me fast. How can I escape this irresistible grasp? Can't keep my eyes from the sunshine. Tongue-tied and twisted, just an earthbound misfit.
When Momentary Lapse of Reason was recorded, Dave Gilmour had to re-establish the Pink Floyd brand. And unlike when Syd Barrett had been fronting the band, there was no real recognisable face. That worked to his favour because really all he had to do was reproduce the sound, which obviously he'd been a part of for many, many years. He later told us that Nick Mason and Rick Wright had not played a big part in the recording of the album because their self-confidence had perhaps been bruised by the previous regime. So in some ways this album is the product of a one-man band, but a very good one at that.
I was just over the moon that they were going again, you know. I mean, obviously it was without Roger, but I'd still rather see the Pink Floyd, you know, it's going, you know, in whatever form, really.
I think most Pink Floyd fans did like it. I mean, they might not have liked it, the fact that Roger Waters was not in the band, but it was still a good album. It wasn't an absolutely outstanding album, but it was a very good album.
Dave Gilmour was never going to be Roger Waters. In fact, he was going to be something different almost by definition. He wrote the album with the help of a lot of other people. It never had the conceptual feel that previous Pink Floyd albums had done. But I think if you listen to it, you have to say it's a Pink Floyd album.
I think there tends to be a lot of criticism towards the Floyd after Roger Waters left, and that they weren't as creative without him. But I do think that's unfair. And obviously, people's ultimate dream would be to have Roger Waters back in there. But it almost seemed to me like a bit of a situation of sour grapes, you know. Nobody wants to feel that things can continue without them, you know. It's a sad situation.
Sweet smell of the great sorrow lies over the land. Plumes of smoke rise, merge into the leaden sky. A man lies and dreams, green fields and rivers, but awakes to a morning with no reason for waking.
I think David Gilmour managed to magnificently salvage the act and produce an album which is a stunning achievement. It has redressed the balance that Pink Floyd lost with the final cut. The playing is excellent, the compositions work very well.
Definitely a Pink Floyd sound, different. But again, it was maybe affected slightly by the era, the 80s, you know, the sound, because it had an 80s sound to it slightly, but that would be the era.
It's vastly different than The Wall, a vast improvement on the final cut. No matter what anyone says, I think that's very clear to Floyd fans anywhere.
I think the imagery that was associated with the album and developed by Hypnosis is very, very stylish. Again, Hypnosis did a magnificent job. They actually, in the days just before computer manipulation was available, lined up 2 miles of beds on Devon Sands, and they had to create these images in the camera. So it's a very disturbing and a very evocative set of images.
Learning to Fly is a song that really takes you within the mind of Dave Gilmour. You know it's about him, you know it's about him learning to fly.
It's great feel to it, great feel, great progression. You know, the song moves in the right direction all the time. That's the thing about the Floyd throughout all the career, really. They do everything at the right time, you know, musically. They kind of just know exactly what to put in and what not to put in. It's probably what they don't put in that makes it work, you know, but with what they do put in it, everything moves and everything's so dynamic. You know, it's brilliant stuff.
position to compare with this. Suspended animation, a state of bliss. Can't keep my mind.
With the band now back on top form, the public clamoured for tickets to see Pink Floyd live, and a huge string of stadium concerts were performed across the world for audiences which averaged around the 100,000 mark. With the arrival of the video age, it was inevitable that the tour would be filmed as well as recorded. The resulting double album and video proved to be another triumph for Pink Floyd.
The concerts were great, and the job they did on bringing the delicate sound of thunder to fruition was great. It's a highly listenable live album.
Momentary Lapse of Reason had established that the band still had the energy and the creative edge, and Delicate Sound of Thunder was the proof of that. They wanted to go out and say, not only can this group work in the studio, it also works magnificently in the live arena. And I think this was the defining moment for Pink Floyd for me, because it was that tour that really proved to a world, I think there were over 300 dates, that the music and the visuals could work in a way that no one else before or since could even begin to attempt. It was on such a grand scale and such a magnificent achievement that I don't think it will ever be replicated by any rock band anywhere.
There were people who believed that the Pink Floyd lineup post Roger Waters was really nothing more than a glorified tribute band to the band that had made such classics as Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. There can't really, therefore, be any point in them re-recording material that Roger Waters had a hand in, because by doing that, they're really only perpetuating something that ended long ago. However, having said that, a tour that lasts for 3 years and takes in 200 dates has got to have a film, DVD or live album programmed into it to cover the costs. So I think these things were a necessary evil.
I think that anyone who's heard David Gilmour's coruscating guitar solo on Comfortably Numb in the Delicate Sound of Thunder live album would disagree with that. He certainly takes that song and takes that solo to a completely different place.
It's an incredibly well-produced album. The recording quality is just phenomenal, and it's amazing. Yeah, it was, because I got the album after I'd seen them a few times over that tour, and it sounds exactly. They do sound like that live. That's to anybody who hasn't seen them. That is exactly what they sound like.
I think the cover on Delicate Sound of Thunder was fantastic. The light bulb man. What a way to go to a fancy dress party.
It was to be 6 years before the huge Pink Floyd audience would get a taste of the band in the studio. At last, in 1994, the Division Bell appeared. Ironically, this very last of the 12 Pink Floyd studio albums was to be the only Pink Floyd album to hit #1 on both sides of the Atlantic.
I think it's classic Floyd, completely. You don't have necessarily the angry side of earlier Floyd, but you have certainly a lot of brave moves. You have a lot of brave lyrics as well. You have Dave Gilmour seemingly talking about an argument that he's had with Roger Waters. Obviously that'll probably never come to light whether it did or it didn't, but I think that was aimed at Roger Waters, and I thought, well, fair enough, there's been a lot of anger your way in the past, so. But to me, I just think that it's perfect, just fits in with all the others to me.
Nick Mason and Rick Wright were now fully functional and part of the team. But with Dave Gilmour not being a dab hand at writing lyrics, he enlisted the help of his wife-to-be Polly Sampson and also Nick Laird-Clews of the Dream Academy to help him. Together with other collaborators, the songwriting tended to be a little diluted compared with previous efforts, where Momentary Lapse of Reason had perhaps been a collection of songs that he'd been unable to use in the previous Pink Floyd lineup.
I think they were probably jamming like they were in the older days when they all got on a bit better, maybe. there's definitely that early sound. I thought a lot of the Division Bell was like that Wish You Were Here era. That's what I really loved about that album. Kind of brought you back to sort of the guys just jamming together, you know, letting it come out like it probably always did. And there's a great feeling of that on that album. You do miss Roger, but you know, it's a different band and it was a different album, but I still think it's a mind-blowing album.
I think it's got a nice feel to the album. It flows in and out of the individual songs very, very well. And you know, whether people can say, oh, it's classic Floyd or not, is almost irrelevant. It's not a bad album at all. And I think a lot of that comes through from, you know, Gilmour's wonderful playing in the album, for starters. The contributions from the others in the band, of course, make that work so well. But also the influence of Bob Ezrin.
Division Bell is very much a return to form by Pink Floyd. I mean, there was a long gap between Delicate Sound of Thunder and the release of Division Bell. And again, we find Gilmour looking around. It's much more a collaborative album. Lyrics come from a lot of different sources, but it still has the essence of Pink Floyd. It's not a solo album, and Cluster 1 is a great example of exactly how good this band could still be sort of 30 years after its birth.
With the tour to support the album came the inevitable live release, Pulse.